Hello, I'm Christine, Winwick Mum, and I'm going to help you knit a pair of socks. What you'll need to do if you haven't already is download a copy of the free Sockalong Basic 4-ply sock pattern, which you'll find here on the Winwick Mum blog. That's at winwickmum.co.uk, and that's also where you'll find the tutorials that go along with this video series. You can also have a paperback or ebook version of the tutorials if you'd rather have that than look at them online. Are you ready to get started? This video is all about the sock stitch calculation. If you're following along with the online Sockalong tutorials, you need the Getting Started Tension Squares tutorial, and if you're going to be using the Super Socks book, you need page 15. Most people glaze over if you so much as mention gauge and tension squares to them, but here's an important announcement before we go any further. Hand knitted sock size is based on width and not length. That's because you and I might both take the same shoe size, but our feet could be very different widths. It's easy to add extra rounds or take them away to make a sock longer or shorter, but if you get the width wrong, then your sock won't fit properly, whatever the length. So how do we work the sizing out? It's really not as hard as you might think, and even if you think you're not great at maths, this is knitting maths and you will be able to do it. Here's the sum that I use. We take the circumference of the foot in inches. We need the circumference because our feet aren't flat, so just measuring across won't give you the right size. And we'll look at where we take those measurements in a minute. Multiplied by the number of stitches per inch that you knit at, and this is what we're going to work out, minus 10% for negative ease, and that's because you want your socks to stretch around your foot and be a little bit tight to give a good fit. Let's start with the foot measurements. Most often you can just work with the ball of the foot, as for the majority of people, the measurement around the widest part of the foot just below their toes is pretty much the same as their calf measurement. However, if you need to accommodate wider or smaller ankles or calves, then you can measure around there as well and use the same calculation to work out the number of stitches for each of those areas. There's nothing to stop you casting on more or less stitches and then increasing or decreasing to suit the foot that you're knitting for. Next up, we need the number of stitches per inch that you knit at. With 4-ply or fingering yarn, you're looking for 7 to 8 stitches per inch on whatever needles give you that gauge. That works out at about 30 stitches per 4 inches or 10 centimetres, and you can confirm that by looking at the yarn ball band. Sometimes the needle and gauge will be different, even on 4-ply, but that's because the gauge might be given for knitting flat rather than in the round. But generally, if you aim for 7 to 8 stitches per inch, you won't go far wrong. To work out the stitches per inch, we're going to make a swatch in the round on 2 needles. No, don't turn off your computer. It's really easy and it's worth the effort, I promise. Start by casting on a number of stitches. It doesn't have to be a huge number, but it does need to be enough to give you about 2 inches or 5 centimetres worth of stitches so that you can get a good measurement later. The next thing that I do is work 2 rows of knit stitch, which helps to stop the bottom of the swatch rolling up when you're trying to measure. After this, we're going to knit along this row because this is the start of the swatch that we're working in the round but on 2 needles. So you're going to knit all the way along, and when you get to the last stitch, instead of turning your knitting around and going back as you would with flat knitting, you're going to slide your stitches back to the other end of the needle. This is why we use a double pointed needle here. And making sure that you don't pull it too tightly, you're going to bring your working yarn behind your knitting so that you can start again from the first stitch. And then you're just going to keep knitting. You can see the big loop here. You just let that hang as you knit back along the stitches, and you're only going to be knitting from now on, and this is what's going to give you your gauge in the round as opposed to gauge flat. When you get to the end of the row again, you're going to do exactly the same thing. So you're going to push your stitches back to the other end of the needle. You're going to pull the loop of yarn around the back again, and then you're just going to knit. Keep knitting. Don't worry about the loops that are hanging down. You just need to make sure that they are hanging down and not pulling tight. And the more you knit across, the more loops you'll have. You need to keep knitting for a couple of inches so that you have enough fabric to give you a good indication of what your gauge is. Don't worry if the edge stitches look as if they're a little bit loose. You can just pull the loop from behind, and that will tighten it up. And then if you hold on to it with your fingers while you start the next row, then that should make the stitch a little bit tighter so that you don't end up with big flappy stitches down the side. This is what your swatch will look like when you've finished. You've got lots of hanging loops on the back and it looks very messy, but it does the job. And although this looks like any knitted swatch, it's going to show you what your gauge is when you knit in the round. So the next thing to do is to get your tape measure out and measure 1 inch across in the centre of your knitting. Here's my inch marked out with the tape measure. I'm going to count the stitches on the needle as it will be easier for you to see, but you'll probably find that you can count across your tape measure than you're actually counting the stitches in the fabric. I've got 7.5 stitches to my inch, that last half stitch is there on the end, so that means that for me using 2.5mm needles is just right, as I'm between 7 and 8 stitches, and now I can use that number for my calculation. Here's a reminder of the calculation again. You multiply the size of the ball of your foot, or wherever else you want to measure, in inches with the number of stitches per inches that you knit at, and then you take off 10% to get a snug fit. Let's have a go at doing the calculation together. I'm going to use a different example to the one in the tutorial so that you can see how it works if you don't start with round numbers. Let's say this foot measures 8.5 inches. This is what I mean when I say that your feet might be the same shoe size as mine, but not the same width, and this is why this calculation is so important. I've got my stitches per inch, which are 7.5, and I'm going to multiply those two together. So that's 8.5 multiplied by 7.5, and that gives me a total of 63.75, which is rather a precise number, and we don't need to be quite so specific. So I'm going to round that up to 64, and then I'm working with a whole number. Now I need to take off the 10% for negative ease, so you either multiply 64 by 10% using your calculator, or if you don't have a calculator with a percentage button, you can divide 64 by 10 and that gives us 6.4. Again, the number doesn't have to be so precise, so I'm going to round that down to 6. I've got one more sum to do and I'm taking 6 away from 64, which gives me 58. When you're sock knitting, it's always best to have a number that's divisible by 4, so that when you get to the toes, you're not working with an odd number. The two nearest numbers which are divisible by 4 are 56 or 60, and because I'd rather go a little bit bigger than smaller, I'm going to choose 60. There's still a bit of guesswork at the end, but in this case it's 2 stitches either way, so it really wouldn't make a huge difference. And there you go, socks that are much more likely to fit you and fit you well, whatever your foot shape and size. Before I finish, I'll just quickly give you a rough guide to the general gauge for sock knitting in the round. You might prefer to knit more tightly or loosely than this, but at least it gives you an idea when you're working up your swatch for the first time. 4-ply or fingering generally knits up at 7 to 8 stitches per inch on a 2.5mm or US 1.5 needle. 6-ply knits up at 6 to 7 stitches per inch on a 3mm or US 2.5 needle. 8-ply or DK, which knits up at 5 to 6 stitches per inch on a 3.5mm or US 4 needle, and Aran, which in my experience also knits up in a very similar way to 8-ply or DK, so that's a 3.5mm or US 4 needle, and that gets around 5 stitches to the inch. It's absolutely fine to play around with the needle sizes or even the stitches per inch to see what works for you, but the main thing is that your knitted fabric should be firm to make it hard wearing, but not so stiff that it will be uncomfortable to wear.